Sorry, I'm not clear on.
Oh, no, no, that's perfectly fair question to ask. As near as I understand, my experiences, the people who I have spoken with, my connection that I've had with my superiors, contact that I've had with my superiors, this is something that has occurred in physical reality. As you and I are here, if I poked you with a screwdriver, it would be as real as anything that I ever experienced physically in this frequency, dimension, and reality as we understand it. That is my understanding of how those experiences work. I do understand what you're talking about, is the gentleman who was just speaking about teleoperating into a clone body or a drone body. That is a technique that I have been in programs that used that for missions where, you know, it was like, we're going to send you somewhere, but it's so dangerous, we're going to have you teleoperate a body that if it dies, you don't die, and you'll still be here. So I do recall conducting certain missions to certain places that did occur in that way. But as near as I understand, again, I was physically present for my tour of duty as much as a person could be, as near as I understand how that happened.
Okay, thank you.
But it's yeah, no problem. But it's a perfectly fair and legitimate question to bring up and to inquiry about. So it's really interesting to me when we start to talk about different species, how much variation there is among groups that we often think of as homogeneous. So when you say Nordics, for instance, that often is in a reference to a grouping of a humanoids species who have an appearance that is physiologically similar. And it turns out that because of really family connections, as far as, so you have Agarthans, subterranean persons who live here, who are classified as a Nordic group or part of a Nordic species, who live here and have lived here for quite some time. We also have some of their family members who come from a few other different places, who are also identified as Nordics, but you may be much more specific and say, oh, we're actually talking about Pleadian Nordics, or we're talking about Andromedan Nordics, or we're talking about, you know, Centauri Nordics. I mean, in some ways, there's enough of these genetics of these tall, blonde, you know, species running around that they're most of them are family related. Most of them come from common ancestry in a few different places, and then come in some even more common ancestry beyond those you know, groups where live on those planets. So there is an interesting grouping there that kind of spreads out, and that's true for a lot of species. There are a lot of species that are very prolific and have moved around and settled here, and set seed there, and so you have these variations that can be widely varied in their specific approach to how they're dealing with themselves, other species, the planet that they may live on, and interactions thereof. So they're in no way homogeneous. They're in no way unified thinking, philosophy, metaphysical approach to the universe. They can be as varied as human beings on planet Earth. If we were to think of human beings as a singular species, which were such a mix, but if we were to think of it that way, we can be really different. They can be really different. But my overall impression of the ones that I have met, and what I have read about them as a species, they're very congenial for the most part. They're most part have a kind of cerebral, biological, genetic makeup that makes them highly intelligent and highly congenial, and not very emotionally reactive to things, and not very hot-headed. And they tend to be, you know, again, very cool-headed, academic, logical, communicative people that, you know, have keen minds and cool heads, and, you know, can have interesting conversations. So I as overall, I would say as a species, they're pretty cool.
Okay. I have a lot of questions, actually. One of these questions is, you said you're in the command of the brigadier, and I was wondering, Did he went through the 20 years program as well? And is he a clone now?
Oh, that's an interesting question. No, my brigadier general has never been on a 20 or 30-year tour of duty. He was actually a World War II officer who served during World War II, who was asked by President Eisenhower to become part of the sort of senior command staff of the United States Marine Corps Special Section. Fortunately, because they have access to the cellular regenerative medical technology, he's well over 100 years old right now. He doesn't like to talk about necessarily his specific age, but he doesn't look a day over 55, and he's well over 100. And most of the senior staff, as I understand, most of them started their careers as World War II officers and were brought into the program by Eisenhower himself, and have been into the program to this very day. And if I'm to understand their future and my future, United States Marine Corps Special Section officers get a life commission, which means I don't get to retire. They don't get to retire. We get to do this job until we are no longer required to be at this job. So I could be just like them. I could be getting well into my over 100 years old and still be serving in some capacity or some form under the command of United States Marine Corps Special Section. So I expect to be at whatever this is for a very long time.
Thank you. Yes. So, hi, Randy. I have a question regarding what's going on right now. And I know how intelligent you are on these topics. How the coronavirus relates to the activities that you are involved with or were involved with, and with aliens, and just in general with everything going on. And also, what are someone living in New York, what advice do you give them? Should I move? Should I maybe move more inland?
Let me give you the short version, please. So I'll try and be super quick and super concise here. We're in a multi-stage operation towards a disclosure event. It is going to be an escalating series of events that go from one socially, economically, militarily hot event to another until we get to what is likely to be sort of an invasion scenario event, which is not to say that it is a real or a fake invasion. To say that it may be an orchestrated invasion is a more accurate term. But here's where we're at. Coronavirus viral epidemic is stage 1. That gets us into sort of a preparatory emergency mindset, gets us kind of thinking about whether people will stay home or whether they'll, freak out about it and protest about it. Then we're going to see here in the U.S., we're going to see some civil disruption from domestic terrorist extremists, not foreign terrorist extremists, domestic terrorists, who feel like, I think erroneously, that they have to sort of create this Civil War 2.0 scenario to, fulfill sort of some vision of the future that they think is correct, which I think is quite incorrect. That's going to be a sign of weakness to people like the Iranians, the Russians, and the Chinese. And then we're going to be in trouble in Syria, the Strait of Hormuz, and the South China Sea, as well as maybe some other places. So one or more of those places, we will start to see hot military conflict. That will be stage 3. Stage 4 is a alien assault. The metropolitan areas will be the least favorable place to be. I don't encourage people to be there. I can't tell people what to do. I can't take responsibility for where people are and what they do. But if you got friends in the country or you got an option to go somewhere else, I would seriously consider what your options are. I know people who don't have options. I know people who are stuck where they are. They got nowhere to go and they're going to be there for the duration. And for those people, I say, always have a little food, always have a little water, always have a medical kit for medical supplies, and just know when to stay low and watch it on television unfold instead of running out into the street and getting in trouble and getting in whatever may be civil disruptive military conflict that might get you hurt. For the most part, it's going to kind of ruffle itself out through the television media process of people watching what's going on. It will create a narrative that walks us through a process that gets us to the other side of a disclosure event where we don't have to be where we are now because we have to be somewhere else. But it has been determined that the only way that this process is really going to work is through a process of this sort of scripted invasion scenario and not the nice, take me to your leader event that some people would like it to be. And I have argued to people who think, well, can't we do it the nice way? No, we can't. We have too many social psychological demographics who would freak out and create even more civil disruption if we did it the not nice way. So apparently this whole thing is just going to sort of roll itself out in such a way that by the time that it's over, we'll just be happy that we're where we are and we won't be so worried about where we came from. And it's not like the entire world's going to get annihilated, and it's not like, you know, entire major cities are going to get leveled or that the entire system or structure is going to collapse. There's just some places that are going to take a punch to the balls a little bit harder than some other places. And most of those places are going to be major metropolitan cities and along the eastern seaboard, if you're talking about here in the United States of America. Other countries, again, I would just say, stay out of the capitals, stay out of the major metropolitan areas if you don't want to be in the middle of the show. If you want to be in the middle of the show, then by all means, stay, you know, downtown, central, big city, USA, wherever that is.
Randy, my question is, your experiences on Mars, are they in the physical or your etheric body? And what do you know about the etheric body?
Again, my understanding of the actual experiences as they took place were in my physical body. The reason that they were able to put me back together after losing body parts or significant chunks of my body does have a lot to do with the fact that we do have an etheric body. So the etheric is a energy blueprint of your body that's exactly the same as the body that you experience physically, except it's in a different frequency. So that it takes place outside of the physical dimension of your reality while still being in the phase of your reality. And it certainly is one of the reasons why we can put people back together when they fall apart, and why people have like phantom limb syndrome and stuff like that. So it's an integrally connected part of your physiological body, but just usually not observable or experiential as part of your body, but it's the energetic, non-physical, ever-present part of your body.
I don't know if you know anything about this, Randy, but my spirit was actually taken from me when I was 7, something like that. And I didn't get her back till I was, 50 years later. And when I did, she was a little girl still. So there I was talking to my spirit like she was a little girl. But I didn't want to ask her much about what happened because I was so scared she'd run away because she was just terrified. Are you aware of any programs that are done with spirits just to help me put this back together?
Well, so there is a science to how the consciousness, the spirit part of the being, the soul part of the, how these parts can be moved from one vessel to another, or separated from a vessel, or separated from each other. It's not my wheelhouse. It's not my special area of study to understand it, but I can say that quite a bit of study has been done on it, which means, because we're talking about essentially a military apparatus that will attempt through research and development to exploit any advantage that they can through any technological advancement that they can, I would suggest that it's likely that they've done that our people and other extraterrestrials have done experiments by moving people's conscious selves and their souls and their spirits from one vessel to another, from one place to another, putting them in other vessels and having them experience other things. Would be almost certain that such a thing could exist, and that various species, including ourselves, would have experimented with that. Beyond that, I got nothing. Nothing specific. Yeah, nothing specific that I would know about a program that they have done or have experimented with, or what kinds of things they may have done with that. That would be way outside of anything I've ever even really, to be honest, thought about asking anybody about. But that's an incredibly good question for now me to ask someone about that and see if I can get some information about that. But I would again just say that from what I understand, that's a thing. It can happen. It's a part of you that is a quantum fluid dynamic. You're the glass, it's the quantum fluid. It can be taken out of your glass and put into some other glass or some other vessel and then put back again. But that's got to be an incredibly fascinating experience to like have that part of yourself to talk to and feel connected to again. That's got to be interesting. That's got to feel like
I can't
pleasant.
talk to her anymore now.
Oh, no.
I've actually had to, put myself back together. So my higher self wasn't present either. So I've had to go through that process. So I've actually had to chart the whole body with all the friggin' points and get all the implants off. But I know one thing, she might have been used to build tunnels, because I know you can't kill me because I can navigate the tunnels and come back.
Okay.
So I don't know. Yeah. Anyway, time will tell when I've got myself fully back together.
It sounds like you've gone through quite the ordeal, and I certainly wish you all the best in the journey to wholeness, because that's always the best journey, is the journey to wholeness.
I can relate to you wanting your memories back. Anyway, thanks, Randy. Thanks.
Oh, my pleasure.
Hey, I just have if you have time for 2 questions, but yeah, my first question for you would be, between the decade where you spent recollecting your memories and doing that meditation with those groups that you were mentioning, and the time when you said that your commanding officers or your brigadier general contacted you to disclose this and become a PR agent, how did you know that, or what were you doing at the time? And what was your job, and how did you know that these people were your commanding officers? Because you kind of jumped in between, like, I was recollecting his memories, and then all of a sudden my commanding officer contacted me. How did you know who that was? And can you just kind of elaborate more on that?
Sure. Yeah, I kind of jumped over that part because there's sort of this chunk that takes up another chunk of story if I were to like really tell the story. But it kind of goes like, as I got to Total Recall, I started to seriously query to some people about how do I contact the people who are responsible for this, who are in this sort of chain of command, or how do I contact these people? How do I make this effort to get information that I feel like I need to have, records that I feel like I need to have and am entitled to, and certainly some query on settlements about back pay and retirement issues, or if I should still be receiving payment, which I should be based on a number of legal ramifications of still being a non-terminated officer who didn't get paid everything that I was supposed to get paid during my service of duty. So during that process, I kind of got some people, including a friend who was a lawyer, a pretty good indication of how to go about doing that, of how to go through this sort of external process of communicating to these people in a way that I just might get results. What I was expecting was that I might get a letter in the mail, or that, you know, I might get contacted in a different way, instead of the way in which I was contacted, which was through a subdermal micro walkie-talkie in the back of my neck, or right under the base of my skull, which was weird, to say the least. And, you know, like, where's this voice coming from? Why does it sound like someone's talking, you know, under the back of my skull? But it was certainly after I had made this effort to connect, to let someone know that, hey, I got a grievance, I want to talk to somebody. And the day that I was in my apartment, walking through my kitchen, when I heard a series of tones in my left and right ears that went left, right, left. And then when the tones were finished, I was standing there very puzzled. I mean, it was like someone playing tones like a hearing test in your ear for a very specific duration at a very specific pitch that went left, right, left. And I stopped. I was like, that's weird. What caused that? What was that from? And that's when I heard the voice. And I hear this voice that sounds like it's someone who was talking right behind my head, right in the, like, sounded like they were talking either right in the back of my skull or right behind me. But of course, as I'm turning my head, there's nobody there. I'm the only person in the room. And the voice pretty clearly says something to the effect of, would you please raise 4 fingers on your left hand, 2 fingers on your right, or whichever it was. And I was like, what? No, I'm not doing, I don't know what's happening right now, but there is no way I am answering the voices in my head. If there's one thing I've learned, you don't do what the voices in your head tell you to do, right? That's like axe murderer stories, like where people start listening to the voices in their head. So I'm just like, no, I'm not doing that. And then after just a couple of seconds of pause of me going, no way, the exact same voice repeats the exact same thing again. Would you please hold up 4 fingers on your left and 2 fingers on your right? Second time again, I'm going, okay, now this is really weird because I've heard whatever this is happening twice. And I'm still like, no, I'm not holding up my fingers. Whatever this voice in my head is, I don't know who you are. I don't know what's happening. I'm not concurring. I disagree. No. And again, a couple of seconds passed. Again, in this very calm, deliberative tone. It did not sound like a recording. It sounded like someone repeating the same sentence in an even calmer and more deliberate tone, actually. And I was like, okay, it's the 3rd time in a row. I think I can presume at this point that if I don't hold my fingers up, and this is going to go all day. So I was like, okay, so I hold up fingers on my left, hold up fingers on my right hand. And then I hear a different instruction. Okay, will you please hold up, 3 fingers on your left and, 1 finger on your right. Like, okay, and I didn't do that. And then there was a third, set of fingers on the left hand, set of fingers on the right hand. I did that. And then the voice says, good, you can hear me loud and clear then. And I said, yes. And then the voice said, Captain Randy Cramer, do you recognize my voice? And is it familiar to you? Am I an officer in your chain of command who is known to you? And the voice indeed sounds incredibly familiar. It sounds like my former commanding officer when I was in the MDF, Colonel Jack Jameson. And I said, yes, it sounds like Colonel Jack Jameson. And he says, yes, that's correct. He said, now, I want to put you on the horn with my brigadier general, who is your brigadier general. And that begins this conversation with my brigadier general that, again, over several weeks, he convinced me to consider doing this PR job, even though I didn't really want to. But that was how they chose to contact me. No one sent me a letter. No one picked up the phone. They chose to use some untraceable, unhackable micro walkie-talkie in the back of my freaking skull for emergency uses only to establish communication. And then we began to have conversations about what the legal protocols were, what the legal ramifications were. It was actually my brigadier general who told me, he said, so if you want to get your records, here's what you do. Here's the letter that you take to your congressman, your senator's office. Here's what you say. Here's what you request. Here's how you ask for it. They're going to want you to fill out some forms and a release, and then you're going to do that. And then we said, what's going to happen is they're going to have to go to, he said, we know where it is. We know what archive it's in. And he told me the archive, which I'm not going to say. And he said, we know it's in this archive from this agency, but we can't, go ask them. If you go ask them and you knock on their door, they're going to ask you if you went to all the other places that you should have asked first. And if you didn't, and you don't have rejection letters from each of them, you're not going to be able to get the information that you want. So someone at the congressman's office or congressman's office will be able to walk you through the process so that you can start looking at the different archives where they're not. And every time you're going to save your rejection letters, which I have a stack of them by now, and you're going to save the rejection letters every time they look somewhere and they're not. So that when you have all the rejection letters from all the different archives that you could possibly have looked for, then when you go to this other agency where we know the archive is at, then they'll look. He said, but if you don't have all the rejection letters from everywhere else, they won't look. Now, what I thought was incredibly interesting is I wrote the letter, I went to my congressman's office, I handed it to someone, waited for someone to contact me. Someone did. Someone called me from my congressman's office. They have someone who, again, because I don't want anyone calling his office, I'm not going to mention which congressman and which state I was living in that I asked. But he had a military liaison who was in his office, whose job it is when someone in the military says, hey, I need to get my records, I need to get access to, benefits, blah, blah, blah. There's a process, and this is the guy that deals with it. And he was explaining to me how many cases he has in his inbox, what they're dealing with. But he basically says, when we're sitting there talking about the process, says the exact same thing that my brigadier told me, which was, well, because I said, we know it's in this archive, and I said the archive. And he said, well, we can't go look there first. We're going to have to actually go to National Archives 1, National Archives 2, Manpower Management. We're going to have to go in order to these other places, and we're going to have to find out that they're not there and get rejection letters from all of them before we can go to the agency and the archive that you're telling me where it's at. So he told me that it was the exact same protocol that my brigadier told me through a micro walkie-talkie in the back of my head, which there's no way I could have known what that protocol was without someone who understood the bureaucracy to explain it to me. And the person who was talking on the other end of the micro walkie-talkie explained it to me. That was exactly the same way that the liaison in my congressman's office explained to me was also going to be the way that we were going to have to go. So with just that example and a number of other things that I won't personally go into, that line of communication has demonstrated to me personally that it is true and accurate and legit and has provided information that has been confirmed through communicating or to other people or going certain places and seeing certain things, that has made it very clear that the information that I'm getting through that communication is in fact accurate. But that's the answer to that story. It's a little weird sidebar there where I was like, okay, now that I know this has happened, God damn it, there's someone who's got to be accountable. And I was on the journey of trying to figure out how to get that accountability when they contacted me and said, okay, here's some options. Here's what we can do. Here's how you can file to get your paperwork. In the meantime, maybe you'd like to consider doing this PR job. Maybe you'd like to consider talking to people. Maybe you'd like to consider doing interviews on radio and television. I was like, no. Maybe you want to write a book. No. But again, after some time of being convinced on what better good I could be doing by doing that than I could be by not doing that, I said, okay, fine, and I agree. But that's the version of that story. It's a little weird. Even in all the things that have happened to me, one of the weirdest things ever is walking through my kitchen and having a micro walkie-talkie go off in the back of my head and have someone call through and want me to raise fingers up on my hand so that they can make sure that we're communicating clearly. But that shit happened. I don't know what else to say, but that shit happened.
Have you had an X-ray at all? Like, was this a chip? I don't know. Have you examined this?
No, it's a tiny little micro walkie-talkie that's so deep under my skull that I don't know what I would be looking for. Now, I have a subdermal dog tag behind my left ear, and I also have one behind my right ear. And I've been in an MRI machine and an X-ray machine that did not detect them. But my left ear, I can actually, in better light, I could actually pull back my earlobe and expose, and you can see that there's a subdermal round bump that's right behind my left earlobe. The one that's behind my right ear, you have to feel in the little divot right there. Over the years of asking what was going on there, when I asked my brigadier, I knew that I had this one behind my ear. He's like, what is this behind my ear? And he was like, well, that's a subdermal dog tag. At one point in my life, I did run into a guy who was a former Green Beret. And, we were having a conversation. I didn't want to tell him what I, remembered about my person. I didn't want to say, went to the MDF. I was just like, yeah, I understand. I've done a few weird things. And I was like, well, have you ever seen a subdermal dog tag behind your ear? And he leans in and pulls back his earlobe and shows me a little bump under his left ear that's exactly the same position and size as the one I have under my left ear. He's like, yeah, I got one right here. So
Okay, and Randy, last question. How would a civilian get involved in this secret space program, like the Mars Colony Corporation? You said the Mars Defense Force defends the Mars Colony Corporation. How do civilians get access to the civilian side of this?
You pretty much have to be in an industry that would have a need. So some of the financial industries and some of the hospitality industries at some level have been involved. My understanding that for certain civilian, like elected officials, again, not everybody gets read in. There are some congressmen and senators who have been to Lunar Operations Command, but obviously not all of them. There are some military personnel get to do this. There are some banking personnel, financial personnel, business personnel. My understanding is that at Lunar Operations Command, there is a Hilton hotel that Hilton, they got, the company to get the contract to put in a hospitality so that there is a hotel so that civilians have a place to stay that is not being run by the military. So there are contractors, there are business people who are in a position of need to have access or need to have something from that business or that industry, who have been asked, who have been employed and had to sign secrecy agreements to be able to be part of those projects. So if you're in an industry where that's possible and you happen to be high up enough in the chain of command or, the son of the owner, that you can get access to stuff like that, but it's a very limited number of personnel that would have access. And there isn't a direct path right this minute that I'm aware of, but I would suggest as we get beyond this disclosure event, that's all going to change. And as that all changes, there's going to be a lot of opportunities for people to be involved in both commercial business transactions and production, industry production that will involve trade back and forth between us and other worlds. So we're getting close to where we're going to have more access to that. But right now, that's part of the travel embargo, information embargo, that is, keeping a very small number of people to have access who are not military personnel. Even military personnel, it's a tiny number of military personnel. The rest of the military, it's a tiny number of civilian and elected officials who get to also sort of participate or go to these places than everybody else. So it's still being kept in smaller numbers, but that's going to change. So cross your fingers, hold your breath, and sometime in the next few years, there'll be some other options if that's really your dream in life to be a part of the thing. The doors will start to open. They're going to need bodies and boots in jobs, both in the military and in civilian sector when all this sort of unravels. And so I encourage people to understand that we will have a pretty sweet economic boom once we get past post-disclosure. It's going to be pretty cool.
Sorry. How are you, Randy? I just wanted to, this might be really out there, but I'm getting guided to ask. The Universal Council, do you know if Earth is part of the Universal Council at the moment or in the future will be part of the Universal Council?
So there's a lot of councils with a lot of different names. And so some of the names, sometimes when they're communicating to people here on Earth, or even sometimes even when they're communicating to psionic specialists in the military, they're not always really specific or descriptive about which consortium they're talking about. So sometimes there's some tracking wait, who are we talking about? Who are you? With what organization? With what group? With what, universe, what council or what consortium? Just because there's a lot of them. So without a different, more specific, like, identification of which council we're talking about and who exactly is a member of it, I wouldn't be able to answer that question. I will say this. We increasingly are allowed membership in these committees and councils as we interact with them, because we behave well, we have good stuff, we don't backstab, our trade partners, and don't make unnecessary, called for military adventurism to places into the world. So we're developing a civil reputation among the intergalactic community, and we certainly get invited and access to a number of different committees and councils as we're going through this process. But without knowing much more specifically about what that means as a translation, like when you translate certain things to Terran or to Earth languages, it's not the same as how that would be registered, like in the intergalactic council. In the intergalactic record keeping system. Like there's an intergalactic registry of worlds that registers the names of planets and star systems according to the names of the planets and star systems that the people who live there have. But that doesn't necessarily mean when we look up in the sky and we see the stars, that's the same. So that the names are equivalent. So there's a data storage problem that gets us from not necessarily being able to identify every council or committee or even species from every planet or star system that we can psionically communicate with, that we can cross-reference every single last one of them in the intergalactic registry of worlds at this point. So there's a little gray area and a little confusion in those areas for me to even take a swing at that one. But I hope that adds some clarity to sort of the bigger picture of what's going on there.
Thanks very much. The one other question is, when you were in your 20 years, did time exist on Mars and other planets?
Oh yeah, time definitely exists everywhere. It just behaves a little differently sometimes. There are certainly other planets. Because Mars is very close to us, it's in the same solar system, and it actually has the same about the same day rotation. It's within a couple of minutes or something, like it's almost a 24-hour day. Time is relatively similar as how it moves here on planet Earth and how it moves there. There are worlds, because of their size, because of their gravity, or because of their relationship or proximity to larger stars, that can completely affect the flow of gravity, which you sometimes can feel when you were standing on that world, and sometimes you can't. Sometimes it's relative. You don't necessarily can't tell that it's moving faster or slower, and sometimes you can. Sometimes you feel like, oh, this doesn't feel like I'm in the same temporal beats at all that I'm normally used to. This seems like something is either moving more quickly or more slowly. So time is totally a sticky variable, and depending on where you are and the gravity and the proximity of other large stars and planetary objects and the gravity that they have, all bend and affect the rate of time or flow of time as we experience, or as any biological life experiences.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Joyce.
No worries. Oh yeah, thanks. So Randy, something connected with your retrieval process. You mentioned that you had, you found out there were some questions that were really helpful for you, and maybe I was wondering whether you could share them. And the other question I had connected to this is, you talk about this being able to know which sort of brainwave state you're in. Is there any particular source of learning you recommend to understand how to tune into the right brain waves?
Yes, write this down. The book is called The High Performance Mind.
Okay.
And the author is a woman named Anna Weiss, spelled A-N-N-A-W-I-S-E. Anna is a former friend of mine, and only former because she passed away a number of years ago. The work that she did was with a mentor of hers by the name of Maxwell Cade, who helped to develop something called a mind mirror. The mind mirror is a brainwave biofeedback device. You put 5 little electrodes on a little halo that you stick around your head, and it will show you in real time what's happening with your left and right hemispheres of your brain, with your beta waves, alpha waves, theta waves, and delta waves. And then the newer versions of the mind mirror also can show gamma waves when you get into a gamma state. But the book itself is a really simple, straightforward, step-by-step. Here's what your fucking brainwaves are. Here's what the patterns look like when you're in different brainwave states. Here are ways in which you achieve those states, how you lower, essentially just by establishing breathing rhythms, or it turns out you stimulate alpha waves by visualizing the color blue. So if you're learning to meditate or you're going through meditative states, one of the early things in a set that you might be doing to get from a beta state to a more of a theta state is to visualize a blue ocean under a blue sky, and let out your alpha waves start to go and slowing your breathing until you get down into a theta range. But the book itself is a great like fundamental understanding and description of what the brain waves are, what the patterns are, what they do, how you want to sort of affect them, and understanding what meditative techniques achieve them. So it is absolutely, when I teach my students meditation, I am basically teaching them from the stuff that I learned from Anna, because it is the most simple, straightforward, fundamental way of understanding what meditation is, what brainwave states are, and how to achieve them with no bullshit whatsoever, with no, bells and whistles of, operating systems of ancient meditative techniques that have things that in many cases are out of time and space for modern people to really understand how to fundamentally use them. I find that a lot of people sometimes using, older, ancient meditative techniques even don't do it very well, because the way the techniques are described are not really telling the student exactly what they need to do and what they're trying to achieve and why they're trying to achieve it. Breaking it down into brainwave states, ideal brainwave states, and understanding through subjective landmarks what's happening in those brainwave states is how you achieve brainwave mastery, which is what meditation is all about, is basically mastering the states of brainwaves that you want your brain to be in at any given time and understanding how to do that. That's the book. If you want to read a book, that's the book. It's out of print, but you can probably find a copy on eBay or, somewhere you can find it. If you Google it, you can find one. It's only probably about $12 American, so it's fairly inexpensive.
Just a quick add-on question, because like for the retrieval, which brain waves would you find the most helpful? Which state?
Well, for memory retrieval, you want to get into your subconscious. So at some point, you want to get into the theta range. You want to be able to achieve theta states to get into your memory core. So your subconscious is the really big part of your brain. And so really what you're trying to do when you meditate is get your brain waves to go down through your alpha states into your theta states and create these patterns where you have what we call, based on what the patterns look like, which you see in the book, we call a theta bubble, which is where you're seeing these amplitudes between, it's like 6 and 9 hertz. And when you've got that bubble between 6 and 9 hertz, you experience a theta state, and that's when you get access to your subconscious and all kinds of, you're able to see, experience through sensory interaction, through what can be like a lucid dreaming state, or in some cases, just the ability to consciously intentionally focus on a thing and have that thing come immediately, fully visually, full sensory into your frontal lobe and into your brain. So that's what real access to your subconscious gives you, is this amazing photographic access to every single bit of information that could possibly be stored in your brain and in your mind, which is all the stuff you remember and all the stuff that is in there innately that you don't necessarily remember, but still in there. So a lot of the human operating system is in your brain. If you can get down into those theta states and access it, you can learn all kinds of things about the way your own operating system works because it's built in. But if you can't get into a theta state, you can't read the manual.
Randy, in the current times, we're seeing a power struggle between China and the US. What's your sense of how this plays out? Have you been informed what's going on?
It's a lot of saber rattling at the moment, but I think that there's a real opportunity, which I think is being pushed sort of on both sides, socially, politically, and with said saber rattling, that it's likely to end up with some struggle in the South China Sea. We're already seeing a lot of pushing back and forth and, you know, military gesturing where one side points a laser target at the other side, and then one, you know, we send submarines, you know, super up close to the coast to say, well, we can get really close, and then they fly some planes, you know, near and target, you know, our aircraft or our places. I mean, there's a lot of pushing back and forth. I think the minute that China feels like we are not strong enough to really get into an engagement with them is, I think, that the moment where they're very likely to go ahead and push. They've made it very clear that they really want to take very solid control of all the other countries that touch the South China Sea and all the territory of the South China Sea, and even have a predominantly, you know, strong influence over the land masses that it connects to, in ways that have already violated international law and not been, you know, very nice about it. So they're pushing hard. We're pushing hard. I would be surprised if it didn't end up at some point with somebody running into someone or taking a shot at somebody or turning it into something that could get, you know, much more hot militarily. Because to be honest, both the Chinese and the American military are chomping at the bit to test equipment and see how they, you know, compare with each other, to be honest with you.
Okay, great. Maybe one more question before we finish.
Hi, thanks, Joyce. Randy, you mentioned there were many stages for starting with the virus and so on, and there could be a false alien attack or real alien attack and so on. Who are pulling the strings and why?
So this is something that has been orchestrated with the agreement of pretty much all of the powers that be on planet Earth. So everyone who has had a chance to engage in this conversation, which is senior members of military intelligence agencies, executive branches, legislative branches, corporate agencies, military intelligence agencies, that all have a part to play in any disclosure event. You want everybody on board with whatever you're going to do. And over really what has been a conversation that I think has gone on the last probably 6 years. So it's been a lengthy conversation, a lengthy back and forth between all of the individuals that represent these powers that be. And at some point, a few years back, it seemed like the decision was made among those powers that be that they were going to go with the invasion scenario plan. So it's essentially an agreement by everyone who has enough information, necessity, or strength to be at this table of conversation to decide what's happening with the rest of the world, with those of us who don't get a vote or a say at that table, which is most of the people. So it is essentially being kept an eye on. Sort of the entire process is being observed and kept an eye on by covert military space program personnel who are intending to, it's the best way to describe this, what sort of was naturally occurring in the world without any action or stimulus whatsoever was going to be the equivalent of a car sliding down the street out of control that is likely to run on the sidewalk and smash into people and kill people before it comes to some place of rest far down at the end of this road. That's a great metaphor for where we were headed and what was happening without any addition of any controls or attempt to guide that process whatsoever. That was what was going to happen. That's where we were headed. The goal here is essentially to understand that you can't stop this car from going out of control. You can't hit the brakes. You can't bring it to a sudden stop. It's going to spin and twirl and fly down this street. And the question is, can you get it to its place where it's going to rest at the end of the road while hitting as few pedestrians as possible and killing as few people as possible? So it's really trying to control something that is otherwise risk being so out of control that the damage is more severe than anything that we would want to have to deal with and recover from, and instead trying to vaguely steer something that otherwise you just can't take total control of and hope that you manage to mitigate the number of lost lives. So that's kind of what was happening here. We were looking at something that was going to suck, that people were going to die, that if we didn't do something, more people would die. And so the only plan that we could get everyone to agree on is the one where we play out this melodrama with a good alien and a bad alien and human beings in between. And we create this controlled narrative so that really the otherwise incredibly violent and disruptive members of civil society around the world don't take it the wrong way and don't make whatever's happening worse. And by turning it into a controlled event where there's a hostile force, it gets everybody on the same page and everybody playing along with a narrative where we hope to mitigate loss of life, not have more loss of life. I don't expect people necessarily to understand when I try to explain like military tactics on, you know, if you're looking at a number that says, if we don't do this, 1 billion people will die. If we do this, only 100 million people will die. And if when you're looking at numbers like that, you pick the thing where 100 million people die because you're trying to keep 1 billion people from dying. And it's not like a good solution when you have to do that. You realize that both solutions are bad. Both solutions will cost lives. Both solutions will cause harm and destruction. You just hope that by picking the one that's less, you'll have less cleanup and less, likelihood that the structure will collapse under its own devastation, and that you can mitigate the civilized salvation of civilization itself so that we don't end the terrestrial experiment in the early part of the 20th century, and we can take this thing farther into the future, at least some centuries, if not millennia, as an advanced type 1 or type 2 civilization instead of as a type 0 civilization. I hope that wasn't too many words, and I hope that made sense.
Great. Thank you very much, Randy. I think we're about time, and you've very generously given. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Randy.
Thanks, Randy.
Thank you.
All right.
Thank you, Randy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.